everybody. Welcome back to Cinematic Perspective. We're glad that you came and joined us for this second episode. I am Gayle Gallagher. I'm a film producer.
I'm Gil Posnanski, all the way from Melbourne, Australia.
And you're kind of a jack of all trades, aren't you?
Well, I'd like to believe so. Bit of a filmmaker, writer, maker, you name it. You guys, you know what? At the end of this episode, you tell me what I am.
Okay, fair enough. And then I'm Wyatt Weed, and I'm primarily a writer, director, sometimes an actor, sometimes a little bit of everything else. We're kind of both jacks of trades. So
When you say jacks like that, I get a little nervous where you're going to go with that.
No, it's okay. I'm keeping it clean.
Mostly.
In
our first episode, we talked about how the three of us all met. So today, we're going to talk about how we all got interested in filmmaking and where our passions began. So we're going to start off with you, Wyatt.
Yes, I'm going to jump in.
This is our Secret Origins episode, right? This is where everyone learns how we got our superpowers, the backstory. We've done that. Now, what was the event? What was it that turned the everyman into, the creative cinematic machine?
What was the radioactive spider bite?
That's right. That's kind of what it is.
There you go.
Maybe we should sue. No, it's okay. It's another story.
Well, and you said filmmakers, and filmmakers is part of it. But I think how
creative artists.
Yeah, how do creative artists get started in general? What's the sort of the impetus that gets them going? For me, I was lucky enough that I had parents who loved movies. I had parents who went to the movies constantly, took us to the movies. We were movie kids, and I mean, I was born in 1964. So I was raised during the whole space race and the Gemini and the Apollo program and the moon landing. So I was fully immersed in NASA and moon.
Astronaut ice cream.
Yeah, astronaut ice cream and space food sticks and Tang.
Tang! Oh, man. I see. We'll get to my origin, which is a little bit further along, but last time I was in the US, I hunted down a big thing of Tang. My roommates threw it out. They refused to have it in the house. I was scared it was going to kind of affect their molecular structure and they wouldn't rot when they pass away or something like that. I'm telling you, I was like, but the astronauts, it worked for the astronauts. It's got to be good for us. So I'm up there with you, Wyatt. I was all about space food sticks. Cannot get them here in Australia anymore. Tang. And recently when I went to I took a whole bunch of students to NASA. These kids got the biggest sugar high on frozen, freeze-dried ice cream. They were eating them, not just one, they were eating 10 of them. I could never seen anything like it. So I understand exactly where you're coming from.
Buzz Aldrin would have punched your roommates over throwing the Tang away.
And I would have filmed it and put it on YouTube and I would have made a fortune. Go Buzz Aldrin.
In the early 70s, the glass jar that had the plastic lunar rover toy shrink wrapped to the outside of it. I was full on space kid. I thought I was going to be an astronaut for a long time. But I grew up with movies, and my parents took me to drive-in movies. They took me to the movie theater. And you kind of went every week. It's like whatever was in the theaters, whatever was new, whatever was popular, you went and saw that movie. So I saw everything, but I was really drawn to the science fiction and the fantasy stuff. But Mom seems to think that maybe one of my first drive-ins, I was 4. So 1968,
What'd you go see?
It was a double feature of The Blob and The Green Slime.
The Green Slime? Oh my gosh. That's another thing we're going to have to talk about.
That we'll have to do a whole episode on The Green Slime.
Okay. I shouldn't cut you off. This is your Secret Origins. Let's go.
No. That's in early 1969, during its initial release, I very specifically remember seeing 2001: A Space Odyssey in the theaters. So imagine being barely 5 years old and seeing 2001. I didn't understand it, but I came home and turned the floor of the living room into a moon base and started playing with spaceships and playing, so classical music on the stereo and running around the house flying spaceships.
At that age, were you aware that this was a movie? Or
Yes, I was aware that it was a movie, and I knew it wasn't real, but I didn't really quite comprehend how it all went together. And that's a whole nother step in the journey. But right about this time, beyond movies too, in the late 60s and early 70s, especially here in the United States, there was a lot of creature features, like Saturday night horror hosts and creature features. And in Central Illinois, we had the Chuck Akery creature feature. And every Saturday night at 10:30, it was the Akery creature feature, and it was some kind of a movie. And it was usually, it was a horror or monster movie, and sometimes it was cheese. Sometimes it was horror of Party Beach, and it was god awful. But sometimes it was the 1956 Godzilla, the 1951 The Thing from Another World,
Gojira.
Fantastic Voyage, Forbidden Planet. And so, and then I got to see the black and white classics, the Universal monsters like Wolfman and Frankenstein and The Mummy.
Hammer horror?
And Hammer horror. I was introduced to the English Hammer horror films, and you started to see the differences in the colors and the styles and the effects and things and how these things were done. And again, I'm at a young enough age where I'm digging it, but I don't get all the moving parts yet. So around this time, late 60s, early 70s, Star Trek was big. Like Star Trek had just left network television, had gone into reruns. And so I was going to kindergarten and first grade and coming home, and Star Trek was on TV every day after school. So I'm totally immersed in Star Trek. And part of the artistic journey here was I wanted, you want toys. You see things and you want toys. And,
Absolutely.
Star Trek, I'd watch episodes of Star Trek, and then I'd go to Kmart and I could buy a model of the USS Enterprise and I could build it. But there were things like King Kong. Like there weren't King Kong toys. And, I want King Kong. It's like, well, sorry, there are no King Kong toys. And my father disappeared down into the basement, and he came upstairs with a big ball of clay. And he fashioned this little gorilla head out of clay and showed it to me. And like the lights went off, the light went on, I should say. And then I took the gorilla head and I made a gorilla body, and then I fashioned a Godzilla, and then I was building spaceships, and I was doing this and I was doing that. So anything that I couldn't find or I didn't have that I wanted, I could build.
But weren't your parents really supportive of that as well?
Oh, absolutely. They, I wanted to be Spider-Man for Halloween, so Mom, helped me make a Spider-Man costume, and she came up with creative, crazy things. And my father was, he was an artist. He was a painter. He drew things. He built model kits. So he supported that. And it got a little crazy. I mean, the only thing they didn't support was like if I left a Godzilla model on the couch and Mom came in and sat down on it and Godzilla's spine went up her back, that was bad. She didn't care about what I built and how much of it I built. And it's like I had a paper route and I bought my own model kits, and it's like it didn't cost her anything. So it was all good. But then as we progressed down the road, I started drawing more, and it all was like in an effort to recreate what I was seeing. I'd see episodes of Star Trek, so I'd draw scenes from Star Trek. I'd see Speed Racer, and I'd watch the opening of every Speed Racer episode so I could draw the Mach 5 just a little. You'd watch that 10 seconds of the Mach 5 in the opening credits and kind of work on your drawing while it was on the TV screen and refine your skills. So my art and my appreciation of films was sort of tied together. One was sort of driving the other. But then something happened, and movies were just cool. They were big in my life. I loved fantasy. I loved horror. I loved science fiction. But in 1975, a little movie called Jaws came out. And Jaws, I think, I appreciated movies. I'd sort of looked at King Kong, and I'd read some books about stop motion animation, and I kind of was starting to understand it all. When Jaws hit, that's when I was like, okay, so big mechanical shark in the water, boats in the water, cameras trying to film all this, trying to move a boat and a mechanical shark, and making barrels go across the water and submerge on cue. And that's where the fascination really started. So for a couple of years there, it was all researching Jaws.
And how would you find all that information? Because the internet's not there at that
Books.
point.
I was scouring bookstores, which prior to, the internet and the rise of digital, there were bookstores everywhere. Bookstores around the corner, bookstores at the mall, bookstores in the strip malls.
Apart from books, did you end up focusing on magazines? I found that through my journey, magazines were the entry point. Books were, you might get a making of book, so you might have something like the making of Jaws or the making of Alien, but they were kind of not as easily as accessible as kind of like the Cinema Fantastique, Starlog, those sort of things that were just starting, and they would have these little articles that would kind of direct you where to look for more information.
Right.
And the books would be more after the fact, right? Where the magazines were kind of the teasers while something was out or coming out.
growing up in Central Illinois, being born in Springfield, Illinois, the thing I had access to the most was Famous Monsters of Filmland. Now, Famous Monsters of Filmland wasn't always like the most technically oriented, like research article oriented kind of magazine, but Famous Monsters of Filmland was a big resource, at least for photo references and things like that, and basic information. And then you'd get those super specials, like King Kong special, and Godzilla special, and a Jaws special.
I'm going to interrupt you. Are you in an issue of Famous Monsters?
I am a Famous Monster, wanted more readers like, where kids would send in their photos and their letters and stuff, and then they would show a photo in the letters section. Wanted more readers like, and I am in. I don't remember
7 or 8.
Yeah,
Forry Ackerman would be so proud. Hey there, film lovers. I hope you're really enjoying this episode of Cinematic Perspective. But I wanted to take a moment out and share with you a brand new project I'm super excited about. It's called Spectacular Distraction, where I uncover hidden gems and forgotten classics from the 70s, 80s, and 90s. The movies and shows that shaped pop culture, but somehow slipped through the cracks. Remember those films that only aired once or twice, disappeared completely, but got stuck in your head? We'll find them, break them down. The rip-offs, the inspirations, and we'll go through and find out all the different pieces that are missing from cinema today. So if you're as obsessed with cinema and pop culture as I am, come on a nostalgic journey with me. Search for Spectacular Distraction on YouTube, hit subscribe, and never miss out on a hidden gem, deep dives, or iconic moments. Because everything else is just Spectacular Distraction.
I met Forry once. I worked on a horrible horror film called The Laughing Dead. And Forry was a zombie in The Laughing Dead, and I was a zombie in The Laughing Dead. So we get to hang out for a little bit and be zombies together.
Not only did I get to go to meet Forrest Ackerman through some research that I was doing, so I got to see the original black and white Peter Pan that Disney based the animated Peter Pan on, and I found myself standing with a friend of mine who was a big scholar for the Ten Commandments. So I'm standing outside the El Capitan before it became a theater for the Tonight Show with Jimmy Kimmel, or late night at Jimmy Kimmel, I shouldn't say Tonight Show, someone will sue us. And there I'm standing there with Forrest Ackerman talking kind of, Famous Monsters and horror films. And I remember looking at his hand, and he had Bela Lugosi's ring that he wore from Dracula. And I couldn't help myself. I literally I saw the ring and I would go, is that what I think it is? And he goes, yes, this is Dracula's ring. And I'm like, hunted, despised, living like an animal. And he goes, that's the wrong movie. And I go, yes, I know, but it's Bela Lugosi. Give it to me. I'm from Australia. Amazing guy. Real passionate for the genre that he loved. And it's such a shame that towards the end of his life, people were coming into his home kind of stealing pieces.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, a lot of his collection, these so-called helpers that would, from what I remember, he would open up his home once a month to people to come in and take a look at everything that he had collected.
Which I never did when I was in LA, and I regret not doing it. I wish I had done it.
I wish we could have done it together, because I know that I'm walking around identifying things. And again, usually what ends up happening is I walk in the door and I go, hi, my name's Gayle, I'm from Australia. And then I start identifying, and they're like, who are you? There are people who work in the industry that don't know what all this sort of stuff is. And I'm like, oh, I bit of passionate here. I'm on my own journey. And I remember being in LA when he passed away, and I've got the article that talked about his legacy and what he did for independent and genre filmmakers.
Right.
He loved having an audience, and yeah, he's a very, very cool guy. I believe he actually was buried with the ring. So,
oh, wow.
Bela Lugosi was buried with the cape, but he kept the Dracula ring into the next world. I'm pretty sure.
And then for those that don't know this tangent that we just got on, Forrest Ackerman, his connection to...
He was the publisher, editor. He may not have been the publisher, but he was the editor of Famous Monsters magazine. I think Jim Warren and Warren Publishing published it, but Forry was an author, he was an editor, and he was a sometimes actor, but he was a great supporter. And he was big he might have been one of the early sort of preservationists and restorationists, because he collected like stop motion figures. He had still photos and reference to films. Like, he was one of the people who, we're really going a deep dive now, like King Kong, the lost spider pit sequence.
Oh yeah.
Forey was like the guy who was like, well, did they film the spider pit sequences? Did they not? Did they build puppets? What did they do? And Forey was like, okay, the spider pit sequence existed on some level because here's a photo of a spider puppet in the pit when the guys fell off the log. So it got to this stage. So Forey, and I think this happened when I was alive and reading Famous Monsters, he was like the first guy to go, the spider pit sequence is not a myth. Here's something from it. And whether it got shot or not, or whether it got cut prior to screening. So, but, you know, if you don't know about the spider pit sequence, look it up. Peter Jackson eventually did a recreation of the scene based on the storyboards from the original. So look up the spider pit scene. But, you know, we're talking about Famous Monsters. I only had access to certain things in the Midwest. I only had access to certain things. Like Cinefantastique, I found when I moved to a bigger city like St. Louis, and I found that in the early 80s. I found Cinefex when it debuted in like 1980. So, and then, you know, after Famous Monsters, like I think 76 maybe, Starlog hit, and then I was buying Starlog. So,
did you ever come across City Magic?
Yeah, Cinemagic a little bit later on.
I have my own story where I actually found a few back issues in a specialty store here in Australia, and they were way overpriced. And I bought them and fell in love with the concept, the idea that, you know, every person could take a Super 8 camera and start repeating some of these techniques and effects. And they used to have a thing in there called I think it was Producers Billboard, where you would say what are you working on. And I would go through, and what's amazing when you actually, you know, I found online someone was getting rid of their whole collection. You would see something, let's say, that was published in 1981 on the billboard, and then 1984, you would have a story of the completed project.
Right.
And with the power of the internet, I started hunting people down and asking them for copies of their finished work. And in some cases, it actually put me in touch with people who had gone on and worked professionally in like ILM.
Right.
I believe it's Mark Sullivan, who's an incredible matte artist.
Yeah.
Mark ended up sending me a copy of his like little 16mm film that he had written about. And of course, he ended up in Star Wars specials doing kind of, you know, I would say fan work, but learning his craft that way. And that led him in. And again, you know, to have that connection and then talk about old school in-camera effects to such a level with someone who started where that was the only option. That was such an amazing resource. And I could just imagine they get this email from someone going, "You're talking about something I did when I was 16? Like, you know, come talk to me about working on Casino."
That Mark Sullivan film wasn't High Rise by any chance, was it?
It was High Rise, and I have a copy of it.
It was High Rise, yep. I love High Rise. High Rise is awesome.
High Rise is one of my favorites.
There was a production designer I ended up working with quite a bit named Tony Tremblay. And Tony had put some stuff in Cinemagic, and I was able to talk to him about it years later. It's like, Tony, didn't you? Well, it's interesting you mentioned Cinemagic because Jaws, I'm starting to get interested in filmmaking. I'm starting to research filmmaking. And then, of course, in 1977, Star Wars comes out. Star Wars comes out. I'm 13 years old. I'm old enough to like have a job and have some money and have some expendable income. And now I'm motivated enough and I have enough sort of artistic experience now that, you know, within months of Star Wars coming out, then you get the 1-2 punch that is Close Encounters coming out on the heel of that. So Star Wars and Close Encounters within like 6 months. And it's like, which so many filmmakers, that's their story, but it is what it is. So by like spring of 1978, I've got a Super 8mm film camera and I'm making my own film. So now I'm building the models, shooting the models, experimenting with backwinding film, blowing stuff up, slow motion, and then that just led organically, you know, down the road. I started making my own Super 8 films, and then I got involved volunteering in cable television. In the early 80s, I moved closer to St. Louis, which St. Louis was a big city that had access to a lot of things. So in St. Louis, I was able to volunteer in cable television, which then allowed me to borrow video cameras and big 3/4-inch decks, these Porta-Packs that weighed like 40 pounds that you had to sling on your shoulder and then put this monstrous camera. But we went and started making short videos, and you'd volunteer for the television studio and do these cable shows, and then that would earn you time to go take a camera out and shoot your own stuff. And then in 1984, I finally started going to college and taking creative writing classes, taking filmmaking classes, taking acting classes. And that just led to more and more ambitious projects. But in 1988 is when I finally just decided, listen, in the Midwest, I am not gonna, at least in the Midwest of the 1980s. It's different now, but in the Midwest of the 1980s, when film was still king and film was incredibly expensive, if you wanted to be involved in making narrative feature films, you really had to go to LA. I mean, you could have gone to maybe Chicago, you could have gone to New York, but in the 80s, it was go to Los Angeles. So I packed up my stuff and loaded everything into my 1976 Grand Prix, and with about $500 in my pocket, drove from St. Louis to Los Angeles, crashed with some friends, got involved in some stuff, and I didn't look back for about 20 years. And that's where my film career started.
Awesome.
And it's interesting because some of the little silly things I did, like, here's this full-size costume of Slimer from Ghostbusters that I made out of couch foam that I used scissors and then stippled it with latex and painted it. Well, I had that, and I could show that to people in Los Angeles who, it was kind of crude, but there were people in LA who'd be like, damn, you did that with a pair of scissors and couch foam. Or I had, hand-built X-Wing fighters and hand-built Star Destroyers. Or I had photos of sculptures that I'd done where I'd made latex masks and things.
So they recognized the talent that you
had? They recognized the ability, and the ability to literally, there's that philosophy that is like toothpicks and rubber bands, making stuff out of toothpicks and rubber bands, or paper clips and rubber bands.
Yeah.
And I think they saw that because I built this huge dragon costume out of foam rubber and took it to Worldcon in New Orleans in 1988. And there was this guy there. And you know the story. He's like, hey, I'm a producer. Here's my card. If you ever get to LA, look me up. Well, I got to Los Angeles December of that year, and I called the guy up, and I'm like, hey, I met you in New Orleans. And he's like, what are you doing? I said, I just got to LA. I'm not doing anything. He's like, you want a job? I'm like, yeah. And so like the following day, I'm a production assistant on this horror film, The Laughing Dead, shooting in this warehouse in downtown LA. And like, I'd been there 8 days. I had a job. And so now I'm calling my friends and I'm going, dude, I'm working. I'm doing makeup. I'm doing special effects. I'm on set. And they all were just like, well, if you're doing that, I'm going. And literally, I had a group of filmmaking friends that I hung out with.
Amazing.
Throughout the 80s. Tom and Ted and JD and Richard and all these people in the Midwest. They all ended up in LA at one point in time or another. And then I'd help Ted, and then Ted would help Tom, and then Tom and Ted would help Richard, and Richard and JD would help. And it just, we leapfrogged over each other and gave each other references. And and that's how my filmmaking journey began. So
you got some parallels there, Gil?
Oh my gosh. You're talking about public access. Well, that's where I got my start as well. And, you want to talk about, well, let me go back and talk a little bit about my journey. We have a 10-year gap. So I was born in 1974, and I remember one of my earliest memories is actually going to the cinema. And I think I know how old I was. I was like 3 years old at the time. 3 years old. And my memory is actually walking going into the cinema that doesn't exist anymore. And I remember it being packed full of people. And because of my size, my head was pretty much at the backside of everyone who's in front of me. So I was like, and what that was my father had heard about a movie that had just come out. There was a science fiction movie. He liked watching science fiction. His favorite TV show when he was dating my mother was The Invaders. So they couldn't go out when The Invaders was on TV, right? A Quinn Martin production, The Invaders, It's like I used to still walk around the house and I do this with my finger and he's all like, you're an alien. And also The Outer Limits. There were the two that I remember, The Outer Limits and The Invaders. He could not miss that. And he heard about this science fiction film that had people in the US around the block, which was never heard of before. The people were waiting around the block for hours to see this movie. So my mother said to him, "Why don't you take Gil and his firstborn son, and go see the movie? Like you can bond on that.
Why don't you take Gil and why don't you two get the hell out of the house?"
Yeah, basically, I've had enough of you two. And that movie was Star Wars, and I have a memory of going into the theater, and I know where that memory stops because it stopped at a point where I was overwhelmed by what I was watching. And I remember sitting in the theater, sitting next to my father, who was next to me. I remember the audience, their reaction to the opening, right up to the point where Luke, I think, gets introduced, is where my memory, like my internal recording mechanism, just stopped. But I remember walking out of that theater, and as a 3-year-old, going, I don't know what I just saw, but I want to be involved.
Okay.
Not understanding that it's a movie. I thought, there's a fight going on against these really bad people, and maybe it's kind of cool. Maybe I could become a pilot and live this, have this kind of experience. And of course, as the years went by and Star Wars mania kind of gripped everyone, and everyone knew what was going on, and it was something that completely was different from what had been experienced before. I started learning that no, that's a movie, that's a story that people are presenting to you. And I started becoming fascinated by everything behind the scenes. So I remember there was a making of Star Wars kind of special that had gone on television. And I was incredibly lucky. For some reason, my parents weren't creative. They weren't, I was kind of a little bit like a fish out of water. I wanted to go and create these sort of things. I wanted to make models. I wanted to do that sort of stuff. Unlike, this is where our parallels break a little bit.
Right.
Their kind of idea was that costs money, and like it's not going to lead anywhere. Kind of live a normal, non-creative life. Sorry, Mom. She wanted me to be a doctor. I'm like, a PhD in film, does that work? As I was growing up, I was very limited, so I didn't get like lots of Star Wars toys. In fact, if I remember, any action figure I got was actually a gift, let's say on my birthday, from someone outside the family.
Sure.
And I remember one year on one of my birthdays, I got a Battlestar Galactica Colonial Viper toy from Mattel. And that gave me a spaceship and a model to shoot. And I remember stringing up threads, like a white cotton thread across the room on an angle. And then I would place the Viper with the wings on each side and sliding it down and then grabbing like a Super 8 camera that my father and my mother was given as a wedding present. But I didn't have any money for film. But I would look through the viewfinder and pull the trigger and hear that film that going through, and then just kind of in the scope, you would see kind of a little flicker, which I think was the gate, if I remember correctly, because it was a really expensive camera, which I have now. And I would kind of like recreate the idea of a Viper flying through like the sky, and of course, I couldn't mat it or anything like that, but I remember, like, and I'm talking like 5 or 6 here. Like, I was just like really, the thing that I kind of understood on some level, and it has always been with me, was the idea of the spectacle of narrative, the spectacle that goes along with telling a story. And I love the idea that people could have an emotional response to something that doesn't exist, that can be manipulated and crafted, yet it has an emotional resonance to them. Sure. And that's really been something that I've always carried as an interest in anything that I've created, which is I can have one experience, someone else can have another experience in the same moment, but it's completely different reference. It's a completely different experience. It was always this idea of being able to create something that would tell a story or continue the immersion of and the suspension of disbelief within the story. And I found that incredibly powerful. And of course, Star Wars was the thing that was, hailed at the time. So Star Wars comes out, as a 3-year-old child, I'm now flooded with all these competition films and television shows, which I just gobble up. Like, I remember seeing Close Encounters of the Third Kind and going, that wasn't Star Wars. I don't know what that was. It was way higher level than what I was at, but it was really amazing to look at. And, as years have gone by and I've gone and revisited, Close Encounters and Spielberg's work, there's just a mastery at him being able to create a situation where people are able to go along with the story and get to the end and be, to a certain degree, changed. I will say, though, I don't like E.T., but that's another podcast. And yeah, I mean, there was Battlestar Galactica. There was, which was another, thing that, it was the knockoff Star Wars, but because we were children and it was on TV every week and we were able, and they played it ad nauseum here in Australia. As the years went by, especially in my professional career, when I wanted to talk to people about techniques used in Star Wars and they were locked up by NDAs because they were going back into production with the prequels and then the sequels and all the rest of it, I could always kind of sidestep it and go, well, let's talk Battlestar Galactica, because they were using the same techniques at the time. So they were like, yeah, if it's Battlestar Galactica, I got no problem. Let's talk about that. So, people like John Dykstra and Harrison, Ellen Shaw, and people like that were more than happy to talk about Battlestar just because it was so far away from Star Wars, so far away. But my journey was, I was really interested in this throughout high school and my kind of education career. And I never thought I'd become a filmmaker. I just really enjoyed reading about it. I would go and scour magazines. If there was any type of program on TV that talked about the behind the scenes. So as I was mentioning before, my parents aren't creative, but they bought a video recorder. And we had a Betamax video recorder, and I taped the story of SPFX, which is the behind the scenes for Empire Strikes Back, and I still have the tape, believe it or not. It is so worn out, and there's almost edits where instead of hitting the play button, I hit the record button because I rewind it again to try and watch that sequence again, break it down, understand what was going on. When Star Wars hit television here in Australia, we recorded the whole movie, and then the next night they played the story of Star Wars. So I had that, and that tape got stretched out to the point where I remember my mother saying to me, she's like, you know the dialogue before the actors. And I'm like, yeah. And she's like, what? And that became a bit of a skill for me in watching something one time and then kind of not memorizing it by choice, but memorizing the sequence, and therefore my timing was always what the actor's dialogue was. So that's something that is a neat skill to have. And then I went through and trying to work out what was I going to do. And originally I went into a computer course to be a computer programmer and finished that. It was just a 2-year course. Got a job working decoding bugs in software. And they had these cubicles. I'll never forget. They had these little cubicles, and each cubicle was like a little bit like the scene of Tron where we first meet Alan. There's just thousands of cubicles, and there's just nothing in there, right? There's no... And my cubicle had movie posters and action figures and models. And I remember my supervisor, he's like, Gil, we love you. You're great. We got no problem. If you want to stay here, you do a great job. You're fast. But I remember he walked me away from all the cubicles, and he turned me around with his arm around my shoulder, and he looked. He goes, "Can you see something that doesn't fit here?" And it's like every cubicle is just barren, and then there's my cubicle, which is like my space, which is just, Star Trek toys and Star Wars posters. He goes, your passion is somewhere else. He goes, we're happy for you to be here, but I think in the long term, this is not where you want to be. He's like, follow your passion. And that was really a moment for me where I was like, and he goes, listen, give it a shot. And if you need to, just come back. Just, give me a call. We'll always have a place there. And it was a really nice moment. The company didn't survive. It was a computer game company, but it folded. But it was really a moment for me where I was like, okay, hang on a second. What am I going to do? And I remember very specifically, my friends were all at university having a ball. They were partying and all the rest of it. And I said, you know what? I'm going to go and do a undergrad in philosophy. Because I was dating a girl at that point, and she's like, you're great at an argument. You should do philosophy. And I remember my mother, God bless her, honestly changed my life by saying to me, because I was saying to her, I'm going to go to university. And she's like, yeah, what are you going to do? And I go, philosophy. And she looked at me and she goes, what job is there being a philosopher? And I went, I'm going to be a stand-up philosopher. And she's
bullshit
like,
artist.
Have you bullshitted last week? No. But yeah, exactly. I think I did say to her I was going to be a stand-up philosopher as a joke, and she didn't get it. And she said, why don't you do a film course? And I said to her straight away, there's no film courses in Australia. She picked up this book that had all the university courses. She goes, here's one. Now, the amazing thing about this is the deadline for applications was the next day. The next day, so it was next day, 5 p.m. And I said, I can't put something together. And she goes, what are you talking about? You've got all this stuff that you've been doing. You've been playing around with video. You've been working with very rudimentary 3D models on an Amiga computer using a program called Imagine 3D. I had enough to put something together.
Amiga.
I remember dropping it off 3 minutes before 5 o'clock, like this tape and all the rest of it. And I went, we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens.
Hi, I'm Gayle Gallagher from Cinematic Perspective Podcast. I want to take a minute to tell you a little bit about Caution Elderly People. A few years ago, my parents were on vacation. On one side of a busy highway was a retirement home, and on the other side was the beach. And there was a sign that said, Caution Elderly People. And my dad took a picture of that because he's got a great sense of humor and he thought it was just funny. We got talking about how active older people are now. Based on that, he and I developed a brand called Caution Elderly People. We sell gift items for the active senior in your life. We've taken this design and instead of it just being the elderly people crossing, it's elderly people golfing, Caution Elderly People cooking, bowling, boating. There are so many different activities that we have on our website, and they're great gift items for the active senior in your life, or a fantastic gag gift for anyone hitting those milestone birthdays. You can find us at caution-elderlypeople.com, and you can use promo code PODCAST for 20% off your first purchase.
I remember going for the interview, and the question I think that won them over, because they were looking at all this computer stuff and all the rest of it, and they said, do you want to be Steve Jobs or Bill Gates? And I was like, wow. And I just kind of stopped and I thought about it. And I remember looking them straight in the eye and saying, I want to be Douglas Trumbull. And people were like, whoa, Douglas Trumbull? And I think the other question was, what are you going to do if you don't get into this course? And I said, I'm going to continue doing what I'm doing. I mean, I'd rather learn. And that got me into a media arts course, and film was part of it. And I did that for 3 years, completely frustrated because I wanted to make these spectacular science fiction movie things. And every time I would do something, people would laugh. And I remember a really interesting lesson because there were artists, there were artists and they were doing, really important work. And I was like, I just worked out how to do this kind of effect. And yeah, it parallels what I grew up with, but I'm taking it in a different direction. And I just remember a future filmmaker. I was in a course with James Wan, and he's laughing his head off. And we had worked together on something, and he's laughing. And I looked at him and said, "Why are you laughing?" He goes, "They're not booing. Laugh with them." And I thought, really good lesson. Like, as if they're laughing and they're like, whatever it is, they're not hating what's going on, but it's all cool. And that was a very important lesson as we were going through, because James was doing his horror thing, I was doing my science fiction thing, and finished that, then went in to do a master's. But while I was there, which is why I'm bringing this up, is that they had started a student kind of swap between UCLA and this university. And the minute I heard that, I said, I'm going to UCLA. I was this first year, just didn't know better. And what I found out later was that they were sending the instructors, the professors, back and forth. They didn't have any students that would actually do this. But I had this idea in my brain that I was going to go as an exchange student to UCLA. So I finished that degree. The girl I was dating at the time was studying to be a doctor, so we had to move cities to get into this course, and I continued. And in Australia, we have a 1-year course called an honours year, which is kind of like an extension of your undergrad, and it allowed me to make a movie. That was the thing. When I was an undergrad, every year I made a short movie, and I think I was the only person to do it every year consistently. And usually most people did one movie and then, they never finished it. And I was like, I just wanted, I needed a reason for myself, because I know I'd start something and not finish it. And I was like, okay. So I did this kind of 7-minute science fiction Star Wars / Battlestar Galactica opus where I just wanted a hallway. And, and this is where I wish Wyatt and we were in touch, because I probably did it all wrong. I could have done it a lot cheaper and faster. But I made that film, and that introduced me to another film department, and I was going to do my master's. And my master's was going to be just on special effects, which it was. But somewhere along the line, I walked into the exchange office and said, I want to go to UCLA. And they looked at me and literally chuckled and said, there's no way. Well, no, they said, what department? I said, film and theater, film and television. And they laughed. They said, there's no way they'll take you. And I said, okay, let's try anyway. And the guy was like, I'm not putting all this work in for a rejection. And I said, okay, tell me what I need to do and I'll do it. And I don't know how, but somewhere along the line, I convinced him that I was serious. He said, there's no way they're going to take you. I said, cool. Let me just go through the the motion, so I know I've been as honest as I can be for myself. And we went through, we got to know each other because there was a considerable amount of work to do. And I believe I was, as a master student, they never took an exchange before, and I got what they call the Dean's Dispensation to come to UCLA for a year.
I think that's amazing that you didn't just let this guy who was the clerk stifle your dream. That you didn't go like, oh, well, I guess so. If it's a lot of work and you say so, then I'm not going to fill out all this stuff. But I think that's awesome that you just pushed forward.
Thank you. Part of it was every time I would go and speak to a department about what I wanted to do, they would say, we can't help you. You have to do it by yourself. And there was a part of me that was like, if I'm doing it by myself, what do I have to have the rods in my back, right? I want to be around people who at least understand when I'm sitting there saying, I want to do an in-camera effect with this, and I need, and they'd be like, what are you talking about? I'm like, you guys watch this. You're the film guys. And they're like, we talk about the theory of film. If you want to do it, you got to be where it's being done. So I'm reading about people like Dean Cundy, whose work I really admire. And then I go to UCLA, and the very first introduction that they have to the students, right? They bring Dean Cundy on stage. When Dean Cundy finished his talk, I ran straight up to him and introduced myself. And he was like, what? All the other students are like walking away, which is something that I never get that personally. Even when I've gone to do presentations, whether it's about film or other work, it's like people are all there and then they're terrified to approach you, right? They don't want to talk to you because in their mind, they think that the conversation was only one way and you wouldn't acknowledge them. And what I've learned is by going up and introducing myself, and I started talking about early work, including his work on The Swarm, where he was a makeup artist. And, it got to a point where he was like, I got to go, but here's my email address. Like, we'll pick this up at a later date. And I'm like, yeah, we will. And I'm like, Hollywood. Like, how cool is that, right? So there was these amazing opportunities, and I did my... I was supposed to be there at UCLA for a year, and then it got extended. So that led me to staying in Los Angeles and actually being able to kind of work. UCLA was very kind to me. They took me on as an instructor. Originally, it was like an instructor's helper, an assistant, and then I became an instructor for an introduction to visual effects class because it was bringing people up to speed on a lot of those ideas. And that was like only one semester. And then because I was attached to the university, I could go and work anywhere I wanted to. So I found myself at places like Sony Pictures, on a lot of independents, and slowly people got to know me, which is kind of great. I think, again, some people that I met once said that if you've made it if people are calling you without you having a business card. I don't know if you ever found that, Wyatt, where people are like, hey, I got a project coming up, are you available?
Right.
I had a reputation that if you gave me a problem and if you trusted me, I'd go out and find some creative solution to it. And I would do things like I would go out and spend budgets on action figures and make animatics to show what it would look like in the camera, because there would be a storyboard and I'd look at it and go, that's not going to work because from a camera's point of view, you're not going to be able to do what's drawn because you've broken a line or whatever else. So that's kind of my foray into Hollywood as such. And I got to work for Paramount and a whole bunch of other places, kind of on a really low totem, but it was great because I was standing there and absorbing everything.
Right.
There was a time where I had to make a decision of going back home or staying in Los Angeles.
Sure.
And Hollywood is an amazing place, but it is absolutely brutal. You're only as good as the last job you had. Right. After a while, I was like, I need some time out. And my time out was to pack up and come back to Australia. But with that, my love of production didn't keep me sitting on the sidelines. I went in and I wrote this feature film called The Pool Cleaner. I shot a trailer, and then I remember coming back to a thing called American Film Market to sell the concept and shoot it back in Australia and then pull on all the different themes that I have. So that was the idea.
So that's Gayle's sort of, intro into production and the film world and his creative universe. Gayle.
Yeah.
We throw to you now.
All right.
Because your pathway is probably a little different.
My pathway is very different, but it's funny because listening to both of you guys talking about how your parents took you to the movies, and Gil, same with you, that your parents took you to the movies. For me, I realized that while I was listening to you guys saying all that as a 3-year-old, it wasn't a memory of Dad taking us to the movies. It was memories of Dad putting us in the movies. My dad had the Super 8 camera, and there's a film that, once a month or so, as kids would make Dad drag out and play for us. And it was a magic show. Like when we were filming it, us little kids were like, what are you talking about? And I remember Dad, he had in his head how he was going to edit this. And so we had a top hat, and my brother is pouring water into the top hat, and then he picks it up and puts it on my other brother's head, and there's no water in it. It's, his magic wand tapping on it. And what Dad had done was, all right, pour the water in. Okay, hold still. Don't move. Don't move. And my mom would come in and she would pull the bucket out of the top hat. So now it's an empty hat. Don't move. Don't move. But then when you watch the little movie, it's like, my brother's here with the pitcher, and then he's here with the pitcher, because, you can't not move. So it was these jump cuts that were great, but us kids just loved watching that magic show over and over and over. And Dad had a little soundtrack that he would put the record on and play that while we were watching the movie.
And in terms of age, like, I was born in 64, you were born in 74.
I was born in 67.
She was born in 67, so she kind of falls right in between the two of us.
Right. I'm the baby.
Yeah.
Talk about early adopters. Her father, we've inherited a lot of the equipment now, and just the amount of film cameras, still cameras, early video cameras that would record to a disc or that were little handy cams. And we have easily a dozen, maybe 15 of his
Dad
cameras.
had from over the years. Like, oh, well, this is outdated, and it would just go in a box, and Dad would get the next thing. And
even though he wasn't a filmmaker per se, he was usually in some sort of financial work, like
he was a credit union guy.
But even being a credit union guy, he had that
creative edge.
He had the creative outlet.
Yeah. Later on then, God, when I was 10, 11, maybe, it was before we moved to St. Louis, so I wasn't yet 13. But we did another film, and this one, my brothers and I just still laugh about, The Handyman. And this is kind of we'd all kind of been watching the Harold Lloyd, Charlie Chaplin kind of stuff. So this one was a short film, a silent film kind of thing. And my brother was the handyman, and I was the foreman. And it was another one of those where Dad had it all scripted out, and we got to climb on the roof and get dragged behind a car. And it was just the fun stuff that my dad did with us. So where you guys were going to the movies, I was in the movies. But it's funny because it wasn't until college, and I'm going to jump around a little bit, but it wasn't until college when I'm taking film production classes, and my dad said, hey, I've got these Super 8 films. Can you transfer them to video for us? And I was like, oh my God, my dad was doing what I'm doing now, or I'm learning to do now. He was doing that the whole time I was growing up. And I do remember sitting at the dining room table with him with his little Super 8 editor, where we're winding them back and forth and cutting it and taping pieces back together. So without really being conscious of it at the time, where like you guys knew as kids, you had this passion for film. It wasn't until later that I was like, oh, hey, I grew up with this stuff.
And there were films in your life. Like you saw
sure.
Star Wars and you saw Jaws.
I didn't see Jaws.
It wasn't
I was too young for Jaws.
It wasn't necessarily...
But for me, Star Wars, when that came out, that was a big deal for my brothers and I. I would have been 10 when it came out. So I was the kid target market. Star Trek was on in the evenings, and it's funny because I never really considered myself like a Trekkie, but I know all the episodes. It's just it was on, so it was something we watched.
She was there Christmas of 1979. She saw Star Trek: The Motion Picture.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
I was going to say that. I mean, I remember going to the Star Trek: The Motion Picture, and people going, I love the 7-minute flybys of the Enterprise and Kirk doing goofy eyes at him.
Because we were all doing goofy eyes at it. We were all there.
That's still one of my favorite films. Like, it's highbrow concept-wise, which is what the original Star Trek was all about, the TV series.
We'll have to do a whole Star Trek the
Yeah,
Motion
yeah,
Picture
yeah.
episode. We'll have to do a Star Trek the Motion Picture.
Yes, we'll definitely do that.
So then, despite the fact that my dad was making all these movies, filmmaking for me wasn't the passion. For me, my passion was music. It was, and not playing music, but the music I was hearing on the radio. And we had moved to a house where I could get this radio station that I'd never heard before, and it was far to the left of the dial, and it was all this crazy music that you weren't hearing on the pop radio, and I fell in love with this stuff. And after a couple of years of listening, I ended up meeting a guy, actually a fellow Australian,
I apologize.
who was here in St. Louis, and he worked at this radio station. I'm like, oh my God, I've listened to you. And so he and I, through mutual friends, became friends. And he was actually getting ready to move back to Australia. And he said, Gayle, you're so, enamored with this stuff. Do you want to work at the radio station? Do you want to take my time slot? And I was just blown away. And I'm at this point, I'm in high school, and I'm the kid who is terrified to raise my hand in class. I am that shy and that withdrawn. And so the idea of being on the radio, I've still got the tapes of my first show, and you could just hear my voice cracking and just, so nervous. But he trained me for an hour and then left me there. I'm like, oh my God, Bruce, you're killing me. But working at that radio station was huge for me. One, it made me realize I'm in high school while I'm working there, and it made me realize what I wanted to do. So then I went to look for colleges where I could do audio production. And I started off at one university, and they had very minimal audio production classes. So I switched to another college about a year or so after that, and found the audio studio, and I'm recording bands. But there's limited production stuff there. But in the media degree that I was getting, there was also video production classes. So I started doing the video stuff. And I'm like, oh, this is awesome. So I worked in radio for a couple of years then, and my path to being a producer is just it was weird. It was like I was going this way, and pieces all just sort of started lining up. And working in radio, I would interview bands. That was something that was just kind of a perk and something that I loved doing. And it's crazy because now in the corporate world, that skill, which I never expected that, this is a skill that I'm developing, but that skill led to the corporate stuff that we do now and how much we interview people. And it's awesome when we go into a corporate interview and somebody's like, oh, I just don't want to be on camera, and I hate this, and this is horrible. And then by the time we're done, they're like, oh, thank you so much. That was so fun. You made that so easy. And so I have to credit my years working in radio and interviewing these rock bands for making these people in corporate settings more comfortable.
But you I kind of went straight for production.
Right.
You kind of had some people sort of thump you upside the head and say, Gil, you need to do this. And some wake-up calls with some friends who passed on. And,
sure.
And some people sort of nudging you. You, on the other hand, you went full-on corporate. You're like writing technical manuals and writing instruction booklets. And you're doing corporate video, like how-to videos.
Yeah, in college.
You got forcibly put into the creative field.
Yeah, and actually I was working in corporate video, working for an insurance company at the time, doing video production before I had even graduated school. I ran out of money, so I'm like, time to get a job before I'd even gotten my degree. So yeah, I went from corporate gig to corporate gig for a while. But yeah, that was one of the things that was really great about that, was that you've got these presidents and vice presidents of these companies coming to you going, oh, we just saw this thing on MTV and we want to do this training video that feels like that, and here's $20, go make it happen. And the exercise of having to go, God, what do we have, and how can we make something that has that feel? And I think that, and you kind of went through this, I mean, we've talked about this on some of the films we've worked on, where having to have a limited budget and really make it stretch and figure out how do you solve the problem versus somebody just throwing more money at something.
Yeah.
I think it feels better when you're like, oh, look what we can do with this, and really just kind of pushing those creative buttons.
But did you thrive in corporate America?
But of course not. I was such a square peg in corporate America. I mean, just the having to wear the heels and nylons, and and I'm doing video production. I'm crawling around on the floor, and I'm like, this just is not a good fit. And oh, you got here at 7:02 instead of 7 a.m.
I had the same problem. Nylons and thing didn't work for me either. No.
But you look so good in the heels.
I know. You know what? And the problem was when I knew that was the reason I got the job, I started getting nervous. But I actually had the opposite, which is kind of weird. When I first got a kind of a job or an attachment at Paramount, I turned up in a suit because I wanted to be like, show how respectful it was. And I remember being pulled aside the first day and go, just come in jeans and a t-shirt. Like we're relaxed here. And then I learned there was only like 6 guys who walked around in a suit on the Paramount lot in Hollywood, and they were the 6 big guys who could have your job. So in that day, people were like coming up and being incredibly friendly and nice and introducing themselves, and I realized that they thought I was one of these power players. So there you go. Complete opposite.
Yeah. I'll talk about my escape from corporate in a second, but one of the things, because I had the corporate job, and even though I was like the creative department in a corporate setting, and typically I kept ending up in these companies that was full of engineers. So you had all these very straight-minded, everything fits in a box, and I'm standing on my desk in my cubicle undoing the fluorescent lighting. I just did not fit in that setting. But so my creative outlet outside of my cubicle was multifold. I lived in an apartment that was in a tiny little alley. Like literally you had to go through the alleyway to get to the apartment. And my neighbor and I, he had just moved in. He's like, you know what, we should have a party. And it just started going. And we're like, okay, cool. Let's what do we want to do? So we started having these theme parties in this dank 6-foot wide alleyway. And the first one was a tropical party. And these things just grew and grew and grew. But there was a lot of stuff that went into them. Like one of the guys who was helping us out, one of the neighbors, he was like, I said something about, oh yeah, in the back there we can have a waterfall. And he's like, you're not going to have a waterfall. I'm like, no, make a waterfall just to spite Gary. And so it was all of these pieces. And I think we did, I don't know, maybe 12 different of these alley parties, all these different elaborate themes. Our Arabian Nights party, we had flying carpets, and we had a 3-foot tall working Aladdin's lamp. And so there was all this creative energy, but all these moving pieces that I was helping to put together. And then, oh, I can't even remember what year it was now. My brother was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And so he and I started a cycling team to raise money for MS. But then also this same group of friends that was having these parties in the alley, we decided we would also then have another costume party to help raise money for MS.
Awesome
and
stuff.
That became this big, big thing. It was a huge party, and we took over a bar across the street. Everybody came dressed up either like they were just going to the Oscars or as a character from a film. To get into the party, you had to crawl through the limousine and step on the red carpet to the paparazzi taking your pictures, and you had to be on the list. And yeah, I mean, we made a really big deal out of it, and it was a lot of fun. But again, a lot of moving pieces and a lot of things to put together. While doing these parties, my sister and I had decided, we should really, this is fun. We love doing this. We should create an event planning company. And, so we created a bank account, we created the company, but we didn't really do anything with it because we both had full-time jobs, and it's really scary to just step away from that security of the full-time job. And so summer of 2005, I got asked to leave my full-time job, which is a very polite way of saying I got fired. And, there was that, oh my God, what am I going to do now? And the tears, and that lasted about half an hour. And then it was like, well, thank God that's over. Okay, moving on. And within a week or two of leaving that job, I got connected with Wyatt. He happened to be in town for a film project that he was working on.
Very
And I'm like,
nice.
yeah, like I'd love to work on this. I don't have anything else going on right now. And so, yeah, leaving the corporate world, I actually gave myself permission. I had was paid well enough at that job that I had enough money in savings that I said, okay, I'm going to take a year and I'm going to try and build my own business. I don't want to go back to sitting in a cubicle and under the fluorescent lights.
Oh yeah.
And so, yeah, it was great to be able to be creative. And what I also figured out working on the short film that Wyatt was in town for, I was doing audio, but what was it? Was it the following summer that we ended up doing a 48-hour film project?
Yeah.
And the music video that went along with Timeline, the short video.
Right.
And they asked if I wanted to produce it. And I'd never produced a film before. I didn't even know what that meant at that time. And as I started kind of figuring out, oh, well, you got to figure out who needs to be there and where we need to have it. And do we need any food? And what are the costumes going to be? And what is this detail? And what is that detail? And I'm like, oh, it's like planning an alley party. It's like planning the Hollywood party. I've done this. It's the event planning business that my sister and I were talking about doing. So the years of having these bizarre costume parties in a dank alley led me to realize that I had all of the skills that were necessary to be a film producer.
Right.
So
Awesome.
yeah, so where both of you guys had very distinct plans or paths of we're going to do filmmaking, for me it was so roundabout to get to where I am. But I think I needed all of those experiences to get me here.
So for a feature film project, she just was party planning.
Yeah.
30 days.
30 days in a row.
Yeah, that's all. That's all it was.
Hey, this is Wyatt Weed from the Cinematic Perspective podcast. Now, if you've been listening to the podcast, you know that we make movies. But what you may not know is that we also help other filmmakers distribute their films. Contamination is a documentary that examines sci-fi and pop culture conventions, fans, and the fan culture they inspire. Filmed at the Contamination Convention in St. Louis and directed by Corey Logsdon, it features interviews with Tony Todd, Kane Hodder, the cast of Roger Corman's Fantastic Four, and even adult film star Seika. Next is The First Secret City, an essential documentary for viewers interested in environmental issues, history of World War II, and how decisions made decades ago continue to impact citizens today. Past meets present as a group of seemingly unrelated people discover alarming proof of radioactive contamination that goes back to the creation of the Manhattan Project. Both of these films can be seen or purchased at piratemediagroup.net.
I actually get the feeling that Gayle, you would have refined that technique because you would have done it a lot more than if you, let's say, were doing it on short films, because they're very limited engagements. They're very intense. There's a lot of work, and then it's done, and then you don't know where the next one is, or it could be some time where if you're doing event planning, you're actually honing that skill of being able to, a big part of filmmaking is making sure that if A doesn't happen, you got B and C backed up so you can continue moving with it.
Yeah.
Which sometimes it does come into event planning, but not at the same extreme. And anyone who has the ability to be able to set something up so that you don't lose time, I mean that's key. You've got to juggle. And that's what event planning, a large part of it, is about.
The other event planning thing that I forgot to mention too was that I mentioned that my brother had been diagnosed with MS, and so along with this Hollywood party that we were doing, we also then were doing the Bike MS bike ride, and we had a team that at one point we grew to 50 riders, and we had probably about 20 people that were our crew who would go out and meet the riders at different stops. So again, that's a lot of moving parts of, hey, we've got this big base camp, we've got a massage therapist, we've got a hot tub.
Whoa, hang on, wait.
Planning.
My next production, you're producing it. I want a massage therapist there. I'm telling you.
You want the hot tub too? We'll bring the hot tub.
They're the perks I never were able to organize myself. I want a hot tub and a massage therapist.
Wyatt and I talk about how he likes the fact that I'm a producer, that I don't have the aspirations to direct, that I like the nitty-gritty and the details and figuring out the puzzle piece and putting everything together. And there was a time that I was looking, we were at a film festival and I was watching, it was probably like a 48-hour film project or something. And I was looking at some of these things and I'm like, how would I direct that differently? What would I do? And I'm like, well, I would get Wyatt to direct it and I would do this, this, and this. And I'm like, oh, wait, no, I don't need to be a director. I don't want to be a director.
Sure.
I like the puzzles.
Thank God.
Yeah.
I think it's really important as well, because if you're doing both, usually what ends up happening is the production side eats up most of your attention to just get it to the point where you're on the playing field. And then you've really got to make snap decisions on the day. Even if you've got a storyboard, you're juggling multiple things. You've got 5 or 6 scenes in your head that you're trying to make sure what's going on.
True.
And I've always, the blessing with the two of you, not just because you happen to be married, but the fact that you work as a team, is the fact that you've got these really nice defined roles.
Right.
And my experience has been, at least again on that independent level, is that usually producers want to be directors, so they'll have someone there, but on the day they'll exert their influence, and that can be incredibly frustrating. So there's a lot of amazing, talented people out there who get caught in that cycle of producing, directing, and even funding it themselves, so that they can actually have a shot at being able to create, as opposed to having a producer who, like you've just described to us, is interested in producing and creating an environment where someone else can go and actually, be as creative as possible. Right. And again, that's just something that's like a little bit of a thing to be aware of if you are an independent and if you are going down this path.
It's a trust thing too. I mean, the fact that I trust her to do this, I think she trusts me to try and, make a good project and not screw up and be prepared. But I also trust her. It's like, here, I have a problem. Let me present you this problem. And then I know she's going to go and fix it. She's not going to go back to her trailer and, sit around and smoke and drink and screw off. She's going to go back and figure out how to solve the problem. So
I have a trailer?
Well,
It's got a hot tub. I mean, that's questionable.
Yeah. Well, and the other thing too, like on what we learned on Shadowland, was that I viewed my job as keeping you said, I've got a problem. My job was to keep those problems away from you.
Keep the knucklehead stuff off my plate.
Yeah, let you go and do the creative once we started the filming. Yeah. And then I was over here being the buffer, and then we would meet at the end of the day and I'd go like, oh, by the way, Wednesday's location canceled on us. I've rescheduled that. This is going on here. All these pieces have moved and we've got this going on now. So just so you know.
Right.
And but it was really protecting him so he could keep being creative.
I can get you this toy that you want, but it's going to cost this much extra money. And I'd be like, oh, screw that. I don't want it. I don't want it that badly. I don't need the toy.
Yeah, you can have this or you can have this. Which is more important?
I literally remember being on shoot for a production, and literally in the middle of a shot that needed a lot of direction because it was a little technical and we're doing some stuff live in camera, and someone turned up to me and goes, lunch didn't turn up. And I'm like, I don't want to deal with it right now. And if you're the producer, you have to deal with it. If you're going to produce it, you got to produce it. Yeah. And if those things come in, you've got to be there. So, I'm jealous in a lot of ways that you have that amazing working relationship, because anyone who's in the trenches, anyone who's making a production, and I don't know, and this is something that I'd like to discuss in a future podcast, but I don't see myself as this horrible kind of ogre, but when you've got pressures going on, you've got multiple things pulling in different ways, I've been told that sometimes the way I might communicate might not be appreciated. And that's the nice way of saying it. Of course, I don't mean to do that. I don't see that in the moment, but it's more, and I've actually had to kind of slow down and just say, I'm not upset with you, or I'm just trying to work the situation. And I had 10 things that I was juggling. I just got another 20 that got put on. And I'm like, in a little bit of a chaotic moment, trying to work out what I'm going to shift and change, like a Tetris game, so I can get rid of those blocks so everything else can continue falling down the way it was planned. And I think that especially if you're at a level where it's not a professional production and you're asking people to come on board, that is like, people just go, filmmaking, these guys are assholes, without actually having experienced the intense pressure, especially when you've spent months putting this together. and the person turns up, and for their whole involvement is, I just walked through the door 5 minutes. Where's the canapes and the champagne, and where's the stars? You know, that
I
people
tell you
expect.
what, when we were doing the Hollywood parties, because it was like 2 months of prep to put this whole big party together, because it was a big event. And the day of, I had, I don't know, maybe 10 or 12 of my friends that would come to the location to help us set everything up. And I'd be there with my clipboard that had everything on it that needed to get done that day. And I'd be like, okay, everybody, thank you for coming. I'm going to apologize now,
Right.
because I'm about to become the party Nazi, and you're not going to like me most of the day. So I apologize for that, but we have a lot to get done, so let's do it. But I knew, just like you said, I knew that I was just going to be barking out orders, and that I wasn't going to be real polite about everything, because there was so much to get done in a short period of time. But I think that knowing that about myself in advance and letting everybody else know it eased that blow a little bit.
You know, it's incredibly fascinating to hear these kind of backstories. I know both of you, we've spent time over the years, we've gotten to share each other's journeys. It's amazing to see kind of that structure of how we all end up in the same place. And I know for a fact that we're going to dive deeper and start like a puzzle. We've just got the border out there, and we're going to put those fine pieces in. You're going to see that image reveal itself. And it's just fascinating. You know, I find it incredibly fascinating to hear that framework, especially, I mean, Wyatt and my own journey being so similar. And then, you know, the journey that you had, Gayle, coming into production is, you know, when you were talking about being on the radio, I just want to be like, Baba Boy, Baba Boy.
Well, and for anyone who's listening, the three of us is an obvious statement that you don't have to get into Hollywood or filmmaking or creativity by a set path.
Absolutely not.
You know, it can obviously be multiple ways into it. I mean, you hear stories even about actors who, you hear the classic thing about, oh, she was sitting at the lunch counter in the cafe and somebody walked in and went, you got to be a movie star. But no, they've literally been guys who, I'm a construction worker, but I'm a very handsome, very fit construction worker. And oh my gosh, you should be an actor. And the guy becomes an actor. I mean, there are character actors out there right now. It's like they started life doing one thing, and then vice versa. I was just watching the James Bond film On Her Majesty's Secret Service, and George Lazenby was this very handsome model, and they made him James Bond, and he looked at the whole thing and went, I don't like this. Yeah. I'm not enjoying this. I don't want to be James Bond. I'm out. So there is no set path. There is no set way to do it. And, I don't get real corny very often, but like that whole, when one door closes, another door opens, it's like, you got fired. Right. And like you said, you cried for a half hour, and then you went, oh my God, that's over.
Yeah.
And
what's next?
And then you started coming over and going, what are you guys working on? What's going on? And how can I help? And how can I get involved? And it's like, rather than going, oh, woe is me, the world has turned on me, it was like, how can I take this and flip it?
Well, and I know that my parents, despite me having talked about my dad doing the filmmaking, my dad was a very pragmatic guy. So my parents were very worried about me.
I kind of remember some of that.
Yeah. I'm like, oh, yeah, Mom, I found these people, and we're going to go make movies. And yeah.
No, you found a cult.
No, I did that once another time.
I remember that too. I mean, again, my parents were very practical people, and they were like, they understood the idea of Hollywood and selling a movie. They did. I don't think they had the faith that I would actually like be able to turn that into something, because production, not just production, but media is a very hard industry, and I kind of feel like I'm coming up with the negative stuff, and that's not the case. There's some amazing things that I will share where I never thought that a door would open in that way. But what I do want to share is when these things happen, don't freak out. It's happened to everyone.
Yeah.
How do you recover from it? How do you bounce back? How do you move forward?
Yeah.
God, I pride myself on one thing, and that is I've hit a wall so many times. I've had a disaster happen so many times. I've had projects fall out from under me. I've had things come up that seem insurmountable. I usually back off for about 24 hours, and then I regroup and start figuring out how to move forward or what the different it's like it never occurred to me, oh, well, I just have to stop.
Right. It's figuring out how do we keep moving forward.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You've got to be able to do that. And it's a good reminder. Right now, that is exactly what I needed to hear.
In the meantime, make sure that you subscribe to our podcast, whether you're watching YouTube or however you're doing it. Subscribe so you get a notification of our new episodes. And we'll be back next week.
See you then.